Welcome to Radiant Guidance. Today I'm going to be discussing my favorite aspects in synastry or relationship astrology. This is somewhat of a follow-up video to my top red flags in relationships using astrology. Now I'll link that below. It's really useful if you're dating or getting to know someone or having challenges in a connection with someone to identify if one or more of those are present. But on a lighter note, I wanted to talk about some of the most supportive aspects that we can have relationally through my study and case studies of comparing a lot of charts and through my own relating experience as well. So, synastry is essentially comparing two charts, measuring the harmonics between them, and it gives us a sense of the chemistry between two people, the karma, and the way that we connect with this person, whether it's more flowing and harmonious or blocked. And it's a very useful diagnostic tool in relationship and intimacy work or team building work or family work. And so it's very helpful because we can very much pinpoint the areas that we can create some bridges and improve our communication, or really identify the strengths of the two people coming together. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is similar to what I talked about in my other video, but it's the opposite, and that is moon in harmonious aspect with the other person's moon. This is probably the number one thing that's emphasized in traditional systems of astrology, particularly Vedic astrology, that has a whole scoring system just from the moons of the individuals. Why is it so important? So the moon is our deepest heart. It has a lot to do with our lineage and soul ancestry, you could say. And it has a lot to do with how we receive and give nurturance, and also our innate habits and instincts, how we emotionally respond to the world. And so it goes without saying that if these are incompatible, it can be really challenging to fully understand the person and be able to really meet their needs on a very day-to-day subtle level. So a harmonious connection between the moons looks like what we call a trine or a sextile. This is where one person's moon is, say, 12 degrees Pisces, and the other person has their moon at 8 degrees of Scorpio. They are within a very tight degree orb. We usually use like 8 to 10 degrees max, and they are in the same element. So they create a trine relationship, which allows energy to flow, and they're harmonious on an elemental level. So the styles really blend well. We also have sextile, which is another flowing aspect, and this is when we would have someone's moon, say, 24 degrees of Virgo, and another person's moon at 17 degrees of Cancer, let's say. So you have the moons in harmonious, supportive elements. Water is an element that nourishes earth. Earth, creates growth from the water. They're in a harmonious aspect. So there's an easy, just innate enjoyment in each other's company. And there's not a lot of challenge when it comes to being able to read the person and understand their emotional needs and not chafe up against them, because there's just a flow. It doesn't mean there's never going to be problems. And again, we look at the whole chart, but it's one of those aspects that creates a lot of ease. The next thing that's also can be kind of mixed, good or bad, but I wouldn't say is the best, is if they are conjoining. So they're in the same exact sign within 8 to 10 degree orbs of each other. So this can be good, but it can also be somewhat mixed, because sometimes when we have the same exact moon, we can reinforce each other's weaknesses. And so that would be an interesting one, and one to just kind of test out. But essentially, the emotional natures are extremely compatible, and it's going to create a lot of harmony and flow. The next aspect I'm going to talk about that I find to be really supportive and something that is an indicator that in a relationship is going to just feel natural and have a benefit to it is when Mercury is in a trine or sextile to the other person's Mercury. Mercury is our sense of communication. So it goes without saying that when the communication styles are similar, it is really nice. Now, I do have to say I've had some Mercury square Mercury connections with people that are really close to me that have been fine. These were not romantic connections, but they were colleagues or friends, and it gives a lot of dynamic conversation. And so any aspect between Mercuries is really good because there's a meeting of the minds, you could say. And so the square creates a little more dynamicism, if that's a word, but it can also create some tension and misunderstandings potentially, or just two totally different ways of approaching it, where you can actually learn a lot and reflect if you have that patience within you and that awareness. But really, the most supportive aspect would be a sextile or a trine between Mercuries. This is going to be great for working with someone, great for planning and being able to like execute and problem solve because your minds are literally meeting in a very harmonious way. So you're going to find that more often than not, you support and add to the style that and of ideas that someone has. The next aspect that I really, really love is Sun conjunct Moon or Sun conjunct person's ascendant. I have found that most of my like instant friendships have been where one person's Sun is conjunct the other person's Moon, or one person's ascendant, rising sign, is conjunct the other person's Sun. It just creates a very like comfortable and natural connection. Like like the way that one person's personality is shining is very much oriented to how the other person wants to kind of show up in the world. And so there's just like an immediate recognition with either one of those aspects, really. The Sun and Moon is nice because it's the luminaries, and actually the psychologist Carl Jung was actually into astrology, and he did this long-term study of married couples who had been together for, I think, like over 30 years, very long-term relationships, marriages, and the most common aspect was the husband's Sun conjunct the woman's Moon. So it's just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean you need that to have a long-lasting relationship, but within a friendship, within family, it's really nice. Now, keep in mind, it's not just by sign. That will help, but we have 30 degrees in every sign, so you really want to look at the actual degree of the person's Sun and the degree of the person's Moon. You'll really feel it within a 10-degree orb, and it'll be very prominent. I would say it's something that is augurs very well for an easeful and just very connective getting of one another. The next thing I'm going to talk about is Moon with Venus. This is a really nice aspect. Either Moon sextiling the other person's Venus, conjunct the other person's Venus is really, really nice, or trine. So any of the flowing aspects between Moon and Venus, they're very romantic. I would say this is definitely emphasized where there's potentially more of like an attraction quality. Doesn't always have to manifest that way, but there's the way one person perceives pleasure and has a sense of their values is very in line with the just innate way that the Moon person functions and provides kind of emotional support. So it's very soft and romantic kind of aspect. But like I said, you could have this in a friendship. I've actually had this in friendships too. and it gives a nice bondedness. The next aspect that I really appreciate in romantic connections, this is more romantic for sure, is when you have one person's Venus in a sextile or trine to the other person's ascendant, or a conjunction. I've even had the conjunction that can feel very intense. It creates a lot of attraction. So you could argue it's like a slightly, potentially more superficial contact, but in the sense of romance, it actually can go a really long way. You obviously want to see this with other more bonded aspects, but basically the way the person is orienting to the world, the way they express their physicality is very much in line with how the other person perceives beauty and connects to the Venusian things of life. And so there's gonna be a very like long-lasting, consistent, you could say, attraction there, and that can actually go a long way in relationships, because if you have that attraction, it's an important piece of feeling secure, feeling like that person is loyal to you, or that you feel beautiful around them. It can go a long way, maybe more so for women than men, but I think both people want to feel attractive to the other person, and so it can really feel like you're one another's type if you have this, especially if you have it going both ways. The next aspects that I'm going to talk about are more for kind of like the nitty-gritty, the building and the expansion and the consciousness level, right, of two people. So this would be harmonious aspects between Jupiter and Saturn. These are really important in any sort of like colleague, coworker connection, or student-teacher connection, mentor-mentee. You'll probably find these harmonious aspects. So one person's Jupiter and Saturn, ideally they're all like trining or sextiling, so they're in compatible elements. Where it can be tricky is if you have some of the baseline relationship stuff down, but then the Jupiter-Saturn isn't present, meaning that, say the Saturns are square, or one person's Jupiter is squaring the other's Saturn, or they're in no aspect. This can be tricky because Jupiter represents wisdom and expansion, and Saturn is dedication and time. And so ideally you want these two to be interacting with one another. So if one person has Saturn in Earth, let's say, Saturn in Capricorn, and another person has Saturn in Sagittarius, these two people are going to have really different ways that they approach undertaking a project or a goal. The Saturn and Sag person is probably just gonna want to just go for it and maybe take a little more risk. The Saturn and Capricorn person is probably gonna want to have like a very methodical, thought out, slower approach to it. So there in line you can see that would be tricky. It's not insurmountable, but when we're talking about relationships, the style of going after our goals, which you could also argue has to do with Mars, but really like implementing kind of a structure for our life, is really Saturn, how we spend our time, how we utilize our time. So, the Saturn and Sag person would probably think, wow, the Saturn and Capricorn person is just kind of going too slow, or not picking up enough momentum. And the Saturn Capricorn person might think the Saturn and Sag person is being a little too foolhardy, or maybe too grandiose. And so the head spaces regarding time and the use of time and the prioritization of things are going to be very different styles. So what would some of the best aspects look like? It would be if we have someone Saturn in Libra and another person's Saturn in, let's say, Sagittarius, right? They're creating a sextile. Air feeds fire. So air will have this kind of abstract vision, and the fire will want to implement it. And you can see how that would be a harmonious or compatible thing. Same if they're in the same exact element. It's just going to be a really natural agreement when it comes to the more Saturnian things of life. So it's really important, and it's not something that people look at a lot because they can focus a lot on Mars and Venus. And I have to say, Mars and Venus are important, but that's usually something you don't have to like dig for. Mars and Venus is very much our sexual energies anyway. And so usually you're not going to be, especially in a romantic context, in a partnership that didn't already have that going. So we don't want to overemphasize that, at least in my opinion, but we do want to pay attention once a relationship has been going for a longer amount of time to if we have this Saturn and Jupiter agreeance. It's not to say that a relationship couldn't function without it, but I have found that the ones that last the longest or have the most like history to them or legacy behind them usually have Saturn and Jupiter in agreeance. Jupiter is the way we you could say it's our higher belief systems, and so it does connect a lot to our values. It is in a way connected to Venus, but it has a lot to do with our sense of spirituality. And you can imagine when we're with someone who shares our sense of meaning and our same approach to the ideas of the universe or philosophy, they naturally feel like friends or allies, you could say, because it usually spills into our value system and our goals and the way we want to show up in the world. So these are my favorite aspects to have in synastry. And if you have any of them or experience them with like a family member, a friend, or a partner, I encourage you to comment below. Let me know if any of these are your favorite or how they've shown up in your relationships. As always, I do relationship intimacy sessions, and this is useful for partners, family members, or teams of people who want to do team building to better understand where everyone can really shine and what the kind of roles and purposes behind the connection with someone else is. So I hope this was useful to you. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.